Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen McQuestion, my amazing co-host. How's it going, Karen?
It's going well. I'm excited to be here with you today because you were on a vacation. Now you're back.
Yes, and the reality of back to work and not day drinking is harsh. It's like, well, where's my Chardonnay?
We have to explain that you were touring wine country. This isn't just...
I wasn't in Miami Beach with the other spring breakers. No, we went over to Walla Walla just as a little kind of a spontaneous getaway. Cliff's birthday is this month, but I'm going to be in Oregon with my family, and he's not going to be able to go with us. So we were like, let's just go over to Walla Walla, which for anybody not from Washington State, Walla Walla is mainly where they make Washington wines. A lot of Cabernets and Syrahs. We're sort of famous for that. And a lot of people don't realize that the Washington wine country is thriving. Like it's one of the main industries here now. And so it's really fun. And we like to support the local businesses and join their wine clubs and all that kind of thing. It's kind of a subscription program for wines.
Now you're talking to someone who's not much of a drinker. So what exactly does one do? You go there and you go on tours, or how does that work?
Well, you can go on tours, although we usually don't, just because we've been on a lot, both in France and here. So we're like, we know how it's made now. We're good. But yeah, you just go there, and they're usually beautiful settings, like overlooking the vineyards and these beautiful tasting rooms, and they bring you crackers and cheese, and then you have, like a little tiny, it's like maybe 2 sips of each of their wine offerings for the day, and you make little notes, or you decide, oh, I like this one or that one or whatever. And it's just kind of, you try to, well, we're not that great at it, but you try to figure out what is in the finish and the nose and all this stuff, and see if you can match with what they say in the description. That's my little game I like to play. And it's fun as a writer because they use great words. Pencil shade.
And it is the...
That's one of them. I'm like, what?
And that's a flavor. Pencil shape.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
I know it doesn't sound good.
Is the food supposed to be like a palate cleanser in between?
Yeah, although you don't have to do it that way, but I like to have like a little cracker in between just because it helps you really, taste what the differences between the wines and that sort of thing.
So you don't do the thing where you sip it and then you spit it out like they show I think I saw a movie that did that once.
Yeah, they always have a little thing that you can do that with, but unless I really don't like it, that never happened. Although that's funny that you say that, and I need to put this in a book, because when we were in France 5 years ago, we did Bordeaux and Burgundy country, and one of the tours we took was with this guy who he was tasting with us, but he was also driving, so he didn't drink any of it. But he did this weird thing with the tasting. It was like this gurgling, choking noise every time. It was disgusting. And then he would spit into the little can, and I was so grossed out. I was like, oh my God, I wish this guy would stop. So that's how you're really supposed to do it, like, real wine people.
So was this a French gentleman that was doing this?
Yes, he was French, but he was actually had been a chef in the States, in like New York City, for a long time. And this was kind of a different season in life, so to speak. But yeah, so he does these tours, he takes people around, and it was really fun and interesting, but I did not like that.
It was the back of the throat gagging.
Yeah.
That probably got
and
you.
It was like, and he did this weird floppy thing with his tongue, but I'm not going to do it on here because it'll gross everybody out. But it was disgusting.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, yeah, moving on from wine to books. So I'm excited because my fourth Emerson Past Contemporary, The Correspondent, comes out next week. And that was the one that I was worried I wouldn't be able to finish because with my dad's heart attack and everything. But I was able to pull it off. And so that one's coming out next week. And I'm excited for that.
Is that the guy on the cover with the raised eyebrow that I loved so much?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was looking at that cover today just going, man, that guy is cute. Yeah.
I'm not the right demographic
Anyway.
for that, but yes, that guy was really appealing.
Yes, he was. Anyway, well, if you don't have anything to share, we will let everybody listen to this really fun interview with Kayte.
Oh, one thing I want to mention about Kayte Nunn. She was in Australia, and it was 5:30 in the morning when she spoke to us.
Yes.
It was in the afternoon for us. She looked much better than we did, actually, didn't she?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to say my mom always says bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I don't know what that means really, but...
Well, and she was more articulate than me. And I was like, wow.
Yeah. No, she was great. And what a sweetie. It was a really fun interview. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. All right. Well, enjoy the show. Today, we are thrilled to have Kayte Nunn with us. She is the author of 7 novels, including The Botanist's Daughter, which was awarded the 2021 Winston Graham Prize for Historical Fiction. Her previous books have been sold into 12 territories. The Only Child is her first historical crime mystery. Born in Singapore, she has lived in England, the United States, and the Pacific Northwest, and now lives in the northern rivers of NSW, Australia. Welcome, Kayte.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
We're thrilled. We were just curious if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your path to publication. Did you always want to be a novelist?
It was one of those things that it was a big secret. I didn't really even admit it to myself, certainly not to anybody else. I loved books and I loved reading from a young age, and I wrote little stories and terrible poetry when I was a teenager. But it was always the secret thing, and I didn't think I was clever enough. And I had worked in book publishing. That's what I went into in my first job. And so I was around writers, and maybe that made it even more intimidating. I just didn't think I could sustain a story for the length it needed to take. So it was definitely something that was on the back burner for a long time. And it wasn't until I was working as a freelance writer. And ironically, every single job I took because there was more writing involved. It wasn't necessarily fiction, but it was all about the writing. And then I was working as a freelance writer, and I had a gap of about 6 weeks between assignments because I'd often go into offices and fill in for people and that kind of thing, as well as doing articles. And a friend of mine came up to me in the school playground and said, "Guess what? I've written a book and I think I've got a book deal." And I was like, "No, that's my dream." But somehow it gave me, I didn't tell her that. I was like, "Oh, congratulations." It gave me permission. I was like, well, if she can do it, why can't you, Kayte? Come on, get on with it. And so I had this gap and I started writing. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I had no clue, despite having originally worked in book publishing. In terms of actually how to, tell a story, I didn't know. And I just started. And what I found was that I loved the feeling it gave me. At the end of every day, having created a little bit more of the story, having put something on paper that didn't exist in the beginning of the day, was a fantastic feeling. And that's what kept me going. It took me about a year to write my first novel. And then I eventually got an agent after about 6 months of trying. And then it took her a year to sell that book. So it wasn't a speedy rise at all. It required just a lot of hard work.
So if someone is new to your work, which book would you suggest they start with?
That's a bit like trying to decide who your favorite child is, I think. And somebody actually asked me this question just the other week. And I said, why don't you have a look on Amazon, read the little blurbs of each one, and you pick which most appeals to you, because they are quite different, I think. And that's one thing I'm always trying to do, is not write the same book over and over again. And inevitably, I do have some of the same themes. And even now, I'm like, oh, no, have I got another storm? Is that really happening? But yeah, so I think, and look, I'm always trying to get better. So perhaps I might say start with my latest book, but then if they go back to, and look, yes, probably my latest. And then if they like that, they can go back.
So speaking of your latest, The Only Child is a contemporary historical crime mystery. Why did you decide to do a dual timeline narrative? And did you find it challenging to write?
This is the fourth book I've written with a dual timeline, the first of which was The Botanist's Daughter. And I initially wrote it with a dual timeline because I really struggled to get the words down. Coming from a feature writing background, where 800 words is normal, 1,500 words is quite a lot, having to come up with something that's kind of 90,000 words long is a real challenge. And I thought, well, maybe if I write two separate stories that are 45,000 words long, that might be a bit easier. And also, I think it ramps up the tension. I think a reader is perfectly able to hold 2, even 3 stories in their head while they're reading and get a little bit frustrated when it jumps from one to the other, but have a compelling enough story that they just want to keep reading. I have had a couple of readers say that they read one story and then they go back and read the other. And to me, I don't understand it, but each to their own. But yes, I mean, when you're writing a mystery, I think it is a great way of ramping up the tension. And I didn't find it that challenging. I wrote, to begin with, I did. And I spoke to another author here and she said, oh no, just keep your head in one story. So write the historical timeline first and then write the contemporary. And once I did that, that was a lot easier. And then the actual slotting together of them, the only tricky bit was making sure I hadn't given something away in one timeline before it occurred in the other. And that needed a little bit of massaging. But I was surprised I didn't find it as tricky as it might seem.
So you write the 2 separate stories and then you kind of weave them together.
Yes.
Do you write them one at a time, or do you write one chapter of one and one chapter of the other?
No, one at a time. So, and usually starting with the historical timeline. So I'll write that whole story. And then the more contemporary timeline, I'll know what's happened in the past. So the contemporary timeline will be a bit easier as well. Yeah, and it just helps me keep my head in one place. I mean, look, there are, as you guys would both know, there are no rules for writing, and some people do it that way, and some people do it completely the other way, and make it work for them. So you've just got to figure out what you find easiest.
So do you enjoy doing the research that's necessary for the earlier timeline?
I do. I really do. I've always been one of those people who wants to know the nitty-gritty details of things. What did they eat? How did they travel to work? Where do they go to the bathroom? Where do they do their grocery shopping? All those tiny little details I'm quite fascinated by. And often in the course of my research, things will suggest themselves that then become part of the plot and things that have happened. And I think the only problem with writing fiction with a historical element is knowing when to stop. And for me, it's when I've got a good idea of the environment that I'm writing about. And then when I can see what the first chapter might be, and I'm itching to start and write that first chapter. And then I might go along and research as things arise, as I need to know them. And I try not to get lost down too many rabbit holes. But even in my contemporary strands, they'll need some research. The Only Child, part of it is set in, it's all set in the Pacific Northwest in Puget Sound. And it's an area I remember having lived there, but I needed to do a lot of research. And because it was written during a lot of lockdowns, I couldn't go and visit. So, and recently my editor was querying something I described on the floor of the Seattle Library. And she was like, are you sure then these letters are not inlaid? And so I went back and I went, here's the video I watched of the walk around and there you can see the floor. And she was like, okay, yeah, you really did do your research. But yes, no, it's fun.
Do you tend to outline before you get started, or what's your writing process?
I really try, and I think I've finally realized I'm something of a plantser. So I'll try and do a little bit of plotting, but mostly I'm writing by the seat of my pants. My most recent manuscript that I'm working on at the moment, I actually had to, for a course I was doing, I had to do a synopsis, and it's probably only the second synopsis I've ever had to do. Usually I write a little blurb that like you might see on the back of a jacket, on the cover copy, and that gives me enough of an idea of what I'd really like the story to be, what I'm aiming for, without being too prescriptive. But I had to write a synopsis, and it was about halfway through, and I thought, oh great, now I've written it. It was really hard. I really resisted it. Now I've written it, writing the second half is going to be so easy. It's all laid out for me. No, it's not. It hasn't made it any easier. Yeah, I think I'll just stick to having a few ideas of where it's going and that kind of jacket copy. And often that jacket copy really does become the copy that's used on the book by and large. And I know if I'm straying off track, if I go back and look at it and go, oh, no, actually, this is all just going along a bit too easily. There needs to be a lot more tension in there. And there is tension in that jacket copy.
What does a typical writing day look like for you?
I try and write about 1,000 words a day, and Monday to Friday, really, I have daughters who go to school, so once they're up and out of the house and I've done some exercise, I'd start, and I don't let myself get up, really, until I've written 1,000 words. Often I won't let myself have lunch until I've written 500. I'm sitting there going, come on, I'm hungry. It's that seems to be the thing that, and to see that progress, rack up. But that there are inevitably, with a family, things that, roadblocks in the way, appointments that come up. Suddenly a child needs picking up from school because they're ill or they've got to be taken somewhere. And that can be frustrating. And I try and make up the time later in the day or occasionally on the weekend. And then I just sort of tell myself, I'll just go, just sneak away and do an hour. And before I know it, 2 hours have gone by and I'm right into the story. But it does take me a while to settle into the writing. I'll stuff around, I'll look at things on social media, and then it's like, no, come on, Kate, get going. One book, I wrote a lot of it in NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month, and managed to complete the 50,000 words. I was already halfway through the manuscript, so I kind of knew where I was going. But that was a mission that really was quite relentless, doing that every day for a whole month. But I got it done. Try and leave any kind of social media stuff to the evening or the early morning. Any appointments for me, even like doing something as basic as ordering the groceries online and doing that order in the evening saves me a couple of hours in my day. And those school days that I work really are very short.
Have you ever been discouraged during the writing or the publication process? I mean, I would imagine you have.
Oh, gosh. Every writer is, I think. Yes, I can think of one in particular, actually, which was a couple of books ago now, a book called The Forgotten Letters of Esther Durrant. And it was my first US publication and published by William Morrow, which was fantastic. And they were doing really well with the publicity and the stock. And it was in airports all across the country. And then a week later, the whole country shut down for COVID. And so all those books sat in the airport. And as a debut, you don't really get another chance, another bite at that cherry. And I knew it was bad. And obviously, it's, there are a lot worse things that have happened in the last couple of years. But that was really, really quite tough. And then just dealing with rejections, particularly to start with, or dealing with bad reviews. You have to learn to grow quite a thick skin, I think. And I still have to remind myself that, not everybody is going to like everything, and just concentrate on the people that do. But it's something, I still haven't got into my head.
I want to circle back to something you talked about where your books have done really well in the United States. You live in Australia. You've also lived in England. And you set this most recent book in the Pacific Northwest. How do you handle dialogue where there's variations in the slang and lingo? And
it is quite tricky. Ultimately, I have an American editor who might pick up any strange things. Like in The Only Child, I'd written there were a couple of, and he's like, no, it's just a couple. There's no of in that dialogue. So that was one thing that I wasn't aware of. But just generally, I went to school in America for 3 years, grade school. But so I still have that kind of memory. And I had a couple of American boyfriends during my kind of 20s as well. So there's been that influence there. And we get an awful lot of American culture here. I read a lot of books set in America and written by Americans. I watch an awful lot of TV and drama. So hopefully I'm aware of it. And if there are the odd words, I'm really grateful for my editor who will pick me up on that. But I had to remember things like instead of a car park, it's a parking lot, and just those little things that are really important, I think. But hopefully I have an eye for detail.
What parts of writing fiction do you find the hardest, and what is the easiest?
Every part I'm currently doing, I think, is the hardest. And if I'm writing a first draft, I'm like, oh, I wish I was just editing. It's so much easier to be editing. And then when I'm proofreading for, the 11th or 12th or 13th time, and I really don't want to see the book again, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just be starting a new story. So they're all hard in their own different ways. The fun part for me is the daydreaming and the coming up with the initial story idea, and then seeing if it's got legs, seeing if there's enough of a story in there, and that's the really fun creative part. And then also when the characters start to get a life of their own, that's quite good. The hardest is often the bit I'm doing right at the moment, it seems.
At what point do you share a work in progress? Do you have early readers?
I have a writing group, but that's only a fairly recent thing of local writers, and we do tend to share a bit of work, and that's been really helpful. But for my first kind of 5 or 6 books, my husband was the first person who ever saw it, and I could be working on something for a year and nobody has any clue. I mean, my editor might have a very, very sketchy outline, but that's it. And that's quite scary when you've kind of kept it all to yourself. And to begin with, you're like, well, I don't know if this is going to be any good. And I often walk around going, oh God, it's terrible. It's really bad. Things are not working. And my husband's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to record you because you said this pretty much at the exact same point last time. So I'm like, all right, I'll just keep quiet and keep writing. So yeah, usually he's the first person to see the whole thing. My writing group sees little snippets occasionally.
So as he's reading, are you just on the edge of your seat waiting for a reaction?
Yes. I'm like, come on, read. Where have you got to? What's happening? What do you think so far? And he's like, just calm down, let me finish. Yes.
Now, people often ask authors where they get their ideas. That's a question that comes up quite a bit. And you've been quoted as saying, I believe that stories circulate in the ether, and if you are receptive, they will tap you on the shoulder and start whispering in your ear. The writer's job is to then do the story justice. So how exactly does that work for you? Do you get a little bit of a story, like a little kernel, and it grows as you think about it? Or do you get a full-fledged idea?
No, it's a little kernel of an idea, and it can sometimes come when I least expect it, and sometimes I do have to go and invite it to come and find me. The idea for the last reunion, which is about a friendship between a much older woman and a younger woman, I really need to come up with an idea for a book, and I took myself off for a walk. And I live near a place called Byron Bay, which you might have heard of, and it's this kind of mystical woo-woo, bit of a hippie place with lots of good energy around it. And so I went for a walk. There's a lighthouse, which is the most easterly point of Australia, and I thought, right, well, I'll go and make this pilgrimage to the lighthouse, and it's about 100 odd steps all the way up this hill, and I will think about what the story is that needs to come. And as I was walking, I started telling myself this story of this unlikely friendship. And that's where that story began. So I really did go looking for it because I was, I needed to come up with something. Other times I've been, for The Botanist's Daughter, I was walking in the Botanic Gardens in Sydney and taking my daughter for a walk looking for fairies because she was about 4 at the time. And I put my hand on a sundial, and all of a sudden I had an image of a girl in a walled garden with a similar sundial, and I knew it was in England. And just that kind of excitement, you're like, there's really something here. There really is, and I wonder what it is. It's kind of electric. That's really good. And the manuscript I'm working on at the moment, I got that when I was at a party, and I was talking to somebody about where they used to own a property, and I was like, oh, that would be a fantastic place to set a kind of murder mystery. And I knew I had my setting. So it's little bits, and then it's a combination, a confluence of 2 or 3 ideas that then come together. I wish it landed in my lap fully formed, but at least the initial spark for the story does, I think, just come and tap me on the shoulder sometimes. Yeah.
Do you run the kind of the initial idea by your agent or editor or anything first, or do you just start writing?
I usually just start writing, but when I've got a better idea, I might have done a bit of research. I might have written about 4,000 or 5,000 words, and I've got that jacket copy. I will send that to my agent and editor, and my editor in Australia, and say, what do you think? They might have the odd comment, they haven't yet said, oh no, that's a terrible idea. So that's quite good. I have found recently, particularly last year, my head wasn't in the right space, and I came up with some ideas, and I got about 5,000 words in, and then I was like, no, I don't think there's enough of a story here. And I hadn't even shown it to anybody, and I was like, no, shelve it. And that's relatively new for me, to not have confidence immediately in an idea. At least I hadn't written a whole book and then God, no, it's not working, which I know happens and may well happen to me one day.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. Fingers crossed.
Hopefully not, yeah.
We have a fair number of listeners who are aspiring authors. Is there a writing book that you'd recommend for someone just starting out?
Absolutely. I am an avid reader of writing books. It's another form of procrastination for me when I'm not writing. But the absolute standout, and it's one I read at least once a year and always get so much from it each time, is called Writing 21st Century Fiction by Donald J. Maas, MAAS. And it is just chock full of so many suggestions and strategies and ways to look at your novel and different, specific points of your writing that I find it invaluable.
On your website, you have other advice for authors or aspiring authors. Do you have any tips you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I just wrote that as a fun little list of things that I found helpful. But when I knew I was going to be talking to you ladies, I thought I had a big think about it. And I think don't be in a rush is probably, and that was the mistake I made to start with. Don't be in a rush to write it, to submit it, to get it out there, to get an agent, to get a book deal. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It can be really, you can really want that feedback. And sometimes even as an established writer, you really need that feedback to keep you going and to keep your confidence going. But get that from a writing partner or a critique group or even a friend, because a friend will say nice things. And sometimes you just need to hear a few nice things to go, okay, I'll keep going. Mm-hmm. They're interested. They want to hear more. But yet don't be in too much of a rush, because it might seem like something that anybody can do. And anybody can do it if they try, work hard enough and apply themselves. I really believe that. But it's that whole idea of 10,000 hours of practice to be really good at something. It just takes time. And I'm not a particularly patient person, and I've really had to learn patience.
When you write, do you have an ideal reader in mind on the other end?
I certainly did for my first book. And that was my sister, because I wanted to make her laugh and enjoy the book. Not so much anymore. No, I just think, right, what's the idea? Who are the characters? I'm writing to find out what's happened to them. So maybe it's for me. I want to know. Sometimes when I've written that blurb and I send it to my editor, and I'm like, I know that I think there's something in there because I wish somebody would write this story for me because I want to read it.
On those days when you're not feeling the muse, what do you do?
I listen to podcasts. I'm a massive podcast fan, which is how I also came across your podcast. And it inspires me to hear other writers. And I'm like, right, well, they're out there, they're writing, they're getting those words down. So come on, buck your ideas up. That really works. I read good writing that I admire. And I have to be careful that I don't find it discouraging, but mostly I'm inspired and think, wow, that's really good writing. I'd love to be able to write something, as moving or as that. I also might just take myself for a walk. So it's one of those three things, or maybe all of those three things. But yeah, and then sometimes I do give myself a day off, not very often because I can't afford to. I'm trying to write a book a year, I kid myself into it. I go, come on, Kate, let's just read what you wrote yesterday. Let's just have a play around. Let's just add a bit here. And what about that bit you were thinking? And often if I am thinking about the book, usually late at night or sometimes even in the middle of the night, I'll make some notes on my phone. And I just go back to those notes on your phone. Now, where were you going to put that bit? And before I know it, I'm writing and I'm into it. Yeah. So I do have to trick myself from time to time.
That does help to play mind games, that one paragraph or whatever you tell yourself.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy, the things you do. And I'm sure people who don't write must think, oh, you just sit there and out it comes. And it's like, no, there's always that resistance to doing it. Sometimes it flows, but it takes a while to get into that flow state.
Well, in the movies, they always make it look so
They
glamorous.
do. I
Like,
know.
do you ever see the TV show Castle? Richard Castle, the
I was just
is
thinking
that a
that.
US?
No,
Is that
yeah,
not
we
in Australia?
don't
Oh,
have that.
well, he just lives in this fabulous loft in Manhattan, and at parties he's always wearing tuxedos, and when he has book launches at the bookstores, people are lined up outside the door, and
Oh,
like,
I'm going to go look
and he
into
never
that.
seems
That sounds like
he
fun.
never seems to be writing either, but he always has
Yeah,
a book.
yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a book that you would love to write, but you haven't for some reason? Maybe it's a little deviates from your others, or
Not really, but my books are kind of leaning more towards a crime focus. So I think that's been something I'd wanted to do for probably 2 or 3 years, and it's a bit like turning the Titanic when you change genres. Sometimes you have to do it kind of slowly. So I think just to write a really good crime thriller, that's what I'm hoping to do and aiming for. Yes, for sure. One of the things I didn't realize when I first started writing was that you really do need to write, if you're writing commercial fiction particularly, you do need to try and write within a genre if you want to build recognition and readership and make your publisher happy. And that was a big learning curve for me to start with.
What do you find to be the most gratifying part about being an author?
It's the feedback from people. It really is, the positive feedback. Yes, there was about a year ago, I got a message on Twitter from a librarian at a really posh English girls' boarding school. And she said, I read The Silk House, which is set in a boarding school, and there's a bit of mystery and magic in there and witchcraft. And she said, I liked it so much. And here at this school, we give the girls a week off homework every year. So they have no homework for a whole week. And instead of that, they use their time to read. And she said, and I bought a copy of your book for every member of the lower six, which is like a junior in high school. And they're all getting this book to read during their reading week. And that just absolutely blew me away. That was incredible. That was really one of the nicest things that's ever happened.
were you walking on air all week then
I was.
after that?
I was. There was
That's
a bit of a
amazing.
glow. Yeah. And so I wrote them all a letter that they got with the book as well, which was a nice thing to be able to do.
Lovely, very personalized.
Yeah.
Was there something about the process of writing or publishing a book that surprised you?
Just how slowly things happen and how long it can take to get paid, particularly for foreign deals. It can take, a year, 18 months to see any money from those. And to begin with, I was counting the dollars going, oh, well, I might be able to afford to do this. And maybe I'll take a week off here. And it's like, no, they take forever. But it really is how slowly things can happen. And do happen, and you just have to learn to be patient. And it's because an awful lot of care and time and energy goes into putting a book out, and it's not just you doing it, it's a whole team of editors and marketers and publicists and strategists that really, put all the effort into just getting a book out into the world. But it is, I think particularly because I came from monthly magazines where we had a deadline every month, or I had weekly deadlines for articles, and then writing for the web, they just went up and they went out and that was it. And you got on and you moved on. This is a much more intensive process.
And they're dealing with many, many more books than just yours, too.
Yes. Although I've been really lucky, particularly my Australian publishers have always made me feel like I'm the most important one, and my agent too. I don't know how they do it, and that's really quite nice. And you have to remind yourself, no, that they're really busy. They have a lot of authors. Don't bother them too much.
We're always curious if your family reads your books.
They don't. And I've got an 18-year-old daughter, so she perfectly could read them. I think my 12-year-old might read them one day, but my 18-year-old's a bit too cool for school. Although, interestingly, when I was researching The Only Child, one of the research books I used is a book called, I'm just trying to remember it now, and it's completely gone out of my head. But anyway, it was a research book that told real-life stories of girls who had to be sent to homes for unwed mothers and had to be forced to give up their babies for adoption. And she just grabbed that book and has been totally absorbed in it from a non-fiction point of view. She quite likes true crime, so I think it has a similar kind of feel in that it's like, wow, these are real stories of awful things that happen to these poor girls and women. So yes, but no, none of them have read, apart from my husband. And his feedback is pretty much always the same. It's like, you're getting better. That's about it. That's all I get after, the biting my nails. So he's very understated.
Oh,
Yes.
when you're in the middle of writing a book, how consumed are you with the story? Is it on your mind even when you're not working?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And it's the last thing I think about before I go to sleep at night. It's often the first thing I wake up thinking about. The characters that, they might start speaking to me, usually when I'm driving, which is really annoying. And then there's these lines of dialogue and I'm like, oh, this might happen and that might happen. And I have to sometimes I have to pull over and make some notes because I haven't got my voice memo thing working terribly well in my car. So yeah, I can feel like reality is a bit of a step away for me. And I'm consumed with the reality of the story, but I don't mind that. I quite like going to, hang out with my imaginary friends, particularly when the world gets a bit much sometimes.
So you mentioned earlier that you're working on a new book. Can you share a little bit about that with us, or is it a secret?
Well, I can share a little bit. I will be a little bit vague because it's still in progress. It is about a sibling reunion at a remote lake house 20 years after a devastating incident that tore their family apart. That's about it.
Oh, that sounds intriguing.
It does, yeah.
Now, I wanted to mention that your new book, it comes out September 6th, and this episode will air prior to that. So I want all our listeners to put it on their calendar because I was privileged enough to read it. Your publicist sent me a copy, and I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
And it is historical. It's got a mystery element. It's got a mother-daughter relationship. It has like all the favorite things that you love in all books, and it's in this one novel.
Oh, thank you, Karen.
Is there something you want to add to that? Did I not touch on?
No, only that you can pre-order, and pre-orders, I don't know about in America, but certainly in Australia and the UK, they make a massive difference to authors. It means that the bookstores will stock more of your books because they see these pre-orders, and it helps give your book some visibility in those first crucial weeks of sale. So if you have a look at it and you think it sounds like something for you, and you can usually read a sample, and then you can either order it from wherever. You can order it from your favorite bookstore. You can order it from Amazon, and you'll be sure not to forget it. And it'll arrive as soon as it comes out. Is it the same in America?
Exactly the same, yes.
Good.
And it's called The Only Child. I'm not sure I mentioned that.
Thank you.
I want everyone to be clear on that. Well, now I think we come to the part of the podcast where we ask our fun extra questions. Are you up for this, Kate?
I sure am, yes.
Okay. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Balls, eyeballs and testicles, no thank you. Of any animal. I've thought about it. I'm like, no.
This is like our 67th podcast. Nobody has ever mentioned eyeballs or testicles.
We have a show here called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and they make them eat all those kind of gross, disgusting things. And honestly, I am dry retching just looking at it.
This is a better question. Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, Kate Winslet. I think she's beautiful and gorgeous, and yes.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Do you know, my daughter and I talk about this an awful lot. And I think I'm going to put a bit about this in my new novel, actually. Thank you for the question. I'm going to have my characters talking about this. To travel backwards in time. Wouldn't that be so helpful? For the historical writer, but also I'd go back and invest in Apple stocks and that kind of thing. I feel life would be a lot easier in some ways. So yes, time travel.
Practical.
Yes.
Practical applications. What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Cake.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
Working in a rundown old hotel that was a bit like Fawlty Towers, with a barman whose ash used to sprinkle all over the glasses in front of him. And he had yellow fingers.
I can see him. You have a way with words, Kate. If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
The piano.
What is your favorite smell?
Lily of the Valley.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Bungee jumping in New Zealand in my 20s. I hate heights.
And you just hurled yourself over anyway, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Very trusting and foolish.
What's one thing you're really bad at?
Singing. My daughters will tell you that.
Kids will always tell you when you're not good at
Oh, yeah,
Yeah. Even when you don't ask them.
for sure.
And our last and final question, if you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Oh gosh, absolutely, I would. I might do a few things differently. Some poor, questionable relationship choices in my life, but apart from that, yes, absolutely. It's been a wild ride so far.
All right. Well, that wraps it up. This has been so much fun. We're looking forward to the release of your new book, and hopefully you'll be back to share with us with the next one you're working on right now.
Thank you so much. That was really a lot of fun. I love those questions at the end, particularly.
Thanks again. Take care,
All right.
Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
guys.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.